Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Tim Diet. I'm the Executive Director of the Shepherd Higher Education Consortium on Poverty. And so welcome to the Fall 23 Pedagogy and Practice event. So really delighted to be joined here by Dr. Jessie Moore, Director of the Center for Engaged Learning and Professor of English at Elon University. Jessie or Dr. Moore will be sharing findings from her recent book on key practices for fostering engaged learning, a guide for faculty and staff. You can go ahead and place questions as they come up as Dr. Moore is speaking in the Q&A or the chat. I'll monitor both. I suppose the Q&A would be a little bit easier for me. And we'll pose those questions at the end where we'll have time for that. Just a little bit about Dr. Moore. I'll keep this short, but joined Elon in 2004 as a professor in the professional writing and rhetoric program. Dr. Moore is really an incredible scholar, publishing, I lost count, somewhere around 40 articles and book chapters, and co-edited 3 other books prior to writing this book on, for example, on mentoring undergraduate research. Dr. Moore has been a leader at Elon University, directing the Round Center for Engaged Learning since 2016. Prior to that, serving, I believe, as Associate Director. And I've personally had the great privilege of learning directly and working alongside Dr. Moore as a participant in one of their 3-year summer research seminars. So really highly encourage you to go check out their website. They currently have a call out there for starting summer of 24 through the summer of 26 for there's a theme that goes along with each seminar. That upcoming theme is affirming and inclusive engaged learning for neurodivergent students. You also can check out the 2024 conference on engaged learning. That also has a call out there. So take a look around at that. Beyond all of her work at Elon, Dr. Moore has been a leader in the profession with her work with the International Society for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, with ISOTL, right? That's the how we refer to it. Serving as the Communications Committee Chair. In 2013 was the conference co-chair, has been the U.S. Regional Vice President, and I believe currently serves as co-chair of the Publications Committee. Is that right? And also earned ISOTL's Distinguished Service Award in 2019. So really fortunate, great to have you here, Jessie, and excited to hear more about your book. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tim. And it's always Jessie. I always prefer Jessie. So hopefully you can see my screen.
Yep, looks great.
Great. They're always, when there are multiple screens, I like to double check. So thank you. So I am delighted to be here to talk with you all. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for attending. I look forward to your questions as we dive in. I will ask that we start just very briefly with a little bit of reflection. I want to give you a chance to think about a meaningful learning moment in your own experience, whether it's as a student or as a faculty or staff. If you could briefly think about where did that meaningful learning moment occur, who was involved, what was involved, and what made it meaningful for your or others' lifelong learning. And while you're thinking on that, I'll share that the photo here is from one of the center's open access books on what teaching looks like. And Martin Springborg is an amazing photographer and took lots of pictures of teaching and learning in progress and featured those in the book, and it graciously lets us use them in other center activities. I'm going to come back to this question in just a little bit, but I would like you to hold that meaningful learning moment in mind as we talk through key practices for fostering engaged learning. So the genesis for this work comes from primarily the research seminars that Tim mentioned, and I'll tell you a little bit more about those in just a moment. But as the associate director and then director of CEL, I've had the privilege of being involved with all of our research seminars since 2009. And I've had the opportunity to look for themes across those research seminars. I also draw from my own research related to the seminar topics and related to my home discipline of writing studies, and then a review of high impact practices and learning science research. In the research seminars, as Tim noted, are multi-institutional, they're multidisciplinary, and they draw participants from all around the world to collaborate over 3 years on focused engaged learning topics. And those seminars really lead to scholarship that shapes research and practice globally. And here I've shared pictures of a couple of our teams. You can see when COVID struck, we did have to move online, but usually we bring teams to our campus to meet in person. When I am sharing work that is from the research seminar participants, I will make sure to include a photo of the team so that you can see who's involved in that particular research. This is a partial list of the research seminar topics that we've covered so far. We have critical transitions was the first in the model that we currently use. There was one that predated it. And then currently there is a work integrated learning, which Tim is a participant in. There's a one on mentoring. And as Tim noted, we're just about to start one on affirming and inclusive engaged learning for neurodivergent students. We've had more than 200 scholars from over 120 different post-secondary institutions across more than a dozen countries participate in these. And we're always delighted to share the outcomes of that work. So when I'm talking about engaged learning, and this is what I mean, and I drew this definition from a scan of the literature, but also how our understanding has evolved from the research seminars. So for me, engaged learning entails students actively and intentionally participating in their own learning, not only at discrete moments, but rather as an ongoing lifelong activity. So the 6 key practices are really about helping work toward that goal in equitable ways to support all students' active and intentional participation in their own learning, not only when they're working with us in a class or an on-campus job or an internship or a service learning project or community-based learning project, but as they move among and across all of those contexts and even continue beyond the university. Traditionally, we've thought, well, traditionally in the last 20 years or so, a lot of attention around engaged learning has focused on high impact practices. George Koo and AAC&U have published a list of now 11 high impact practices that are officially designated as things that support students' retention, students' sense of belonging, students' long-term success. But the challenge with the officially designated high impact practices is that despite intense efforts to scale up access, we simply don't see equitable participation rates. So here I'm sharing both survey results from the National Survey of Student Engagement, which spans the US and Canada, and the Center for Engaged Learning's poll conducted in partnership with the Elon poll of recent US graduates. So these were alumni who are about 5 to 8 years out from their college experience, and we conducted that survey in both 2019 and 2021. You'll see that internships are the most prevalent of the high impact experiences, but others start to dwindle in participation. Some like study abroad with logistic challenges there, we might anticipate that it would be lower, 19% or 20% or 14%, depending on the survey. Others may start to increase. I think we will see the participation in e-portfolios increase. It's the most recently designated high impact practice. But the bottom line here is that we have a lot of students who are not having opportunities to engage in these experiences. And so my challenge is to think about how can we as faculty and staff ensure that all of our students get the outcomes we associate with high impact practices, even when they're not able to participate in them. High impact practices also tend to focus on expectations of students. I wanted to shift that responsibility to faculty and staff. So addressing challenges of scaling, I really started to think more about what can happen in and beyond the classroom, things that we can implement across university contexts so that students have multiple experiences working with the key practices, not just one experience with a high impact practice. And none of that is to disparage high impact practices. I still think that they are amazing opportunities, but the key practices can also then facilitate integration reflection on those experiences throughout students' lifelong learning. So really, it comes down to fostering engaged learning as an equity issue. With that in mind, I've focused on 6 key practices that I've seen emerging from our research seminars. I'm going to briefly talk about all 6, but I am going to spend just a little bit more time on a couple that I think are particularly productive for fostering Shepherd interns' engaged learning as they re-engage with their home campuses, and that community engaged partners might find as things that they can support. So I'm happy in our Q&A time to talk a little bit more about the others, and I will introduce all 6, but you'll see me focus on 3 in a little bit more detail. So again, the first one is really a cornerstone key practice, acknowledging and building on students' prior knowledge and experiences. That really entails actively and intentionally participating in their lifelong learning by being able to identify their relevant prior knowledge and experiences and adapt it for new contexts. Students bring immense prior knowledge with them, but we don't always tap it when we're working with them in internships, in classrooms, in on-campus jobs and other contexts. In fact, in our 2019 survey of recent college graduates, only 58.9% reported that faculty repeatedly asked them to draw on their prior experiences. 26.6% reported encountering that invitation to call on their prior experience only once in their college careers, and 14.5% reported never being asked to explicitly draw on their knowledge. So why does that matter? Well, partly it matters because our understandings of what prior knowledge and experiences students should bring doesn't always match students' perceptions of their prior. This is a study from our 2011-2013 research seminar where a team looked at students' writing experiences coming into college. And you can see the number of students that they surveyed at each location. Their confidence levels were pretty evenly matched. But then if you look at the experiences, and this is just one of several that their chapter unpacks, the experience in terms of what they've written varies widely. So you can see University of Johannesburg students had much less experience writing longer papers than students in the other contexts. And so their confidence level may not be the best measure of their preparation for the writing that they were going to encounter in college. It also matters because we know students bring a lot of prior knowledge and experience with them. In 2010, I worked with a group from, let's see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different colleges and universities. We surveyed first-year students at all of those campuses about the writing technologies that they had experience using. We've had a couple different publications related to this, but I want to highlight as one example our publication from 2016 showing the types of technologies that students had experience with and the context in which they used those technologies for writing. And of course, as to be expected, a lot of their writing experience was to fulfill a school assignment. But if you notice, for example, they have 31% of their Facebook use was to participate in public life. 16% of their blog use was to fulfill requirements of a job. 18% of wiki use. Now, granted, some of these technologies are not as active these days. We are working on an update of this study, and I have added internships as a context in addition to job context in that study. But the point here is that students bring immense knowledge with writing technologies to our campus classrooms and other contexts, and we might assume it's primarily for entertainment, but they really are using it for other purposes as well. So some of the ways that we can try to make that prior visible is by giving them opportunities to share it with us. This could be via a course discussion. It could be via an exit write at the end of class as you're leading into a new topic or a new assignment. It could be a conversation with a student employee about what types of experiences they've had in their courses that might be relevant. And I'll share later in the presentation why making the prior visible is so important, but it really functions as a cornerstone for some of the other key practices. The second cornerstone is facilitating relationships. And relationships are a cornerstone because they foster a sense of belonging, contributing to retention and degree of completion. They strengthen feedback cultures, supporting lifelong and life-wide learning, and they often facilitate connections to broader contexts, two of the other key practices that we'll talk about in just a moment. But again, not all of our alumni feel like they've had those opportunities to develop relationships. The stats here are a little bit better. Nearly 83% of our college graduates reported having one or more meaningful relationships with faculty or staff, 88% with peers, but 17% reported never developing meaningful relationships with faculty or staff while in college. And that number is just still too high. Particularly when we think about applications to their workplace knowledge and the tasks that they're leading into. So 30% of our recent college graduates thought that they had not developed skills in college for connecting with diverse others, and 25% reported not developing teamwork skills in college, things that if we foster relationships, we can certainly support. So this is from one of our teams that studied residential learning communities. And the key thing that I wanted to focus on here is that relationships, whether they're with staff or faculty, contribute to sense of community and sense of belonging. And from a student's perspective, when we're thinking about social interactions, they don't differentiate between staff and faculty roles. So everyone on a campus and the partners, community partners that we work with, as you'll see in just a moment, can play a role in contributing to developing relationships with students. We at Elon did a large-scale self-study of mentoring relationships. We started this in 2020 and surveyed our first-year students who were the class of 2024 and our seniors who were the class of 2021. So we started in fall of 2020. As you can see here, the different stages of a student's career, they have different needs for how they identify mentors. First-year students were much more likely to indicate that the people who were meaningful to them at that stage were people that had been assigned to them through some kind of structured mentoring program. Whereas seniors said, okay, those were meaningful relationships at one point in my college career, but I have sought out others or had them develop informally over time. And our larger work on mentoring really reiterates that students need multiple pathways to develop meaningful relationships and mentoring relationships in college. Those relationships also lead to supporting students in a lot of different ways. And you can see how that changes over time with seniors much more likely to talk about their mentors contributing to their planning and preparing for life after college, while first-year students are thinking more about things like supporting identity development, advancing academic learning, etc. So there's some variation over time. Part of the reason I highlight the multiple functions of our meaningful and mentoring relationships is that we really do need multiple people supporting students. It would be challenging to ask any one person to support a student in all of these ways, but we can each support them in one or two of these ways as makes sense for our relationship with the students. One of our teams from our Excellence in Mentoring Undergraduate Research seminar developed a framework called the Salient Practices. They're focusing on mentored undergraduate research, but they are also thinking about adaptability to other contexts. And I think many of these could be adapted to community engaged learning and to internships. There are actually 10 salient practices, which you can find on the center's website at centerforengagedlearning.org/salient practices. We also have some videos there that help offer more detail about them. but I highlighted 3 here that really relate to developing relationships, balancing rigorous expectations with appropriate emotional support. We saw that on the previous slide, that students do need the emotional support, not just the academic support. They may not turn to the same person for those types of support, but if we are becoming a mentor to a student, it is important that we think about balancing those needs. Building community among groups of students or a research team, which allows some intentional laddered opportunities for peers and near peers to mentor each other. And thank you, Jen, for dropping the links in the chat. I appreciate that. Those are 3 of the 10 salient practices. Happy to talk more about those in a moment, but I share them because they are some of the things that we can do in our recurring interactions with students and think strategically about. We can also think about students as partners frameworks as a way to help forefront intentionality in our laddered opportunities for peers and near peer mentoring in research teams and work teams. That can allow us to elevate the importance of shared goal setting, co-inquiry, reciprocity. These are 2 of the center's books on pedagogical partnership and partnership more broadly. And the students featured there are actually student partners for one of our research seminars on re-examining conditions for meaningful learning experiences. I think I learned as much from them as from our faculty and staff participants, and that's nothing against our participants. It's just that the students bring an immense wealth of their own knowledge and perspectives that can help inform how we study how students are experiencing an internship, experiencing relationships, experiencing community-based learning. And so turning to students as partners in our studies and application, I think, is really important. So one last slide in relation to relationships. Not mean to do that double, but that works. So at any rate, relationships are really part of a broader relationship campus. So when we think about supporting relationships or developing relationships, it's not just the mentoring relationships. Those aren't the pinnacle of the relationships. They can be very important, but they only happen when we also facilitate other meaningful relationships as part of a supportive campus context or supportive internship context or supportive community engaged learning context. And so it's really everyone in the context is important. We shouldn't think of one as more important than anything else, in part because it's those other meaningful relationships helping with the emotional support, helping with the college career planning support, helping with the networking support that allow mentors to focus more perhaps on academic support or other focused areas. So we've talked through 2. Those are the 2 foundational ones. And apparently I just signaled some kind of reaction from Zoom, so that was not intentional, but it maybe gave you a little bit of a laugh. Moving on to the next key practices, feedback. Feedback is another one I'm going to take a little bit more time with, just because I think that internships, community-based learning are really key sites for being able to foster this key practice. So offering feedback when faculty, staff, and peers and external partners offer constructive feedback, students are better equipped to advance their understanding and application of key concepts. So unfortunately, that is an area where we see some room for growth. 7.1% of recent graduates report never receiving feedback during their entire time in college. 9.9% never received feedback on their work in progress. And 14% never received peer feedback. And it's not just in isolation. If we look at the cross tabulations, 35% of college graduates who reported never receiving feedback from faculty also never received peer feedback. And 41% who reported never receiving feedback on work in progress also never received feedback on a submitted final project. And so that's significant, and it's unfortunate because feedback is part of the learning process. This is Sadler's representation of feedback, where we are working towards a target goal, and feedback helps us compare our work with that goal, and then we can make adjustments to move closer to it. So learning really relies on this comparison, and novice learners may not be positioned to make that comparison without some help from others. So Watling and his colleagues have really encouraged the idea of a feedback culture, where it's not just in the classroom, it's not just in a writing center or a learning center, but building a feedback culture that crosses campus, including in community organizations, in on-campus employment, when students are working with external partners, and so forth. Now, feedback also matters because it actually informs other key practices as well. This was a team that was looking at global learning, and they had requested that their student participants write reflections, and then instructors were giving feedback on it. And it initially was intended as part of their data collection, but they quickly realized that the act of the reflection, the written reflection, was a learning moment for students, and that it was amplified when students got written feedback that helped them process their understanding in relation to the cultures that they were encountering, the difference that they were encountering, and so forth. I also like to talk about co-creation of feedback. So it's not only faculty and staff that can engage in offering feedback, but we can involve students. And one way to involve them early in the process is to invite them in the co-creation of our feedback criteria. That actually helps them better understand the goals of a project or assignment, and it gives them a tool that they can then use for peer feedback even before a faculty member or staff member uses it to assess a final project. In addition, when students participate in peer feedback, they actually can encounter something that Bill Hart-Davidson and Melissa Graham Meeks call giver's gain. And what that is that when we look at, particularly with writing, but also other types of feedback, the more feedback that a student gives is actually a better predictor of their own performance on an assignment or project than the amount that they've written on their own project. And the reasoning for that is that when they are giving feedback to others, they are demonstrating their own understanding of the assignment parameters, and they are often seeing examples of things that their peers have done that they can now work back into their own project. So while peer feedback may sometimes seem daunting in the classroom context, there actually are a lot of gains when we give it time. And it doesn't always have to occur in the classroom. It can be an out-of-class activity. There are some great strategies for facilitating it, and I'll share one in just a moment. But first, I also want to mention that external partners can give feedback, whether that's internship supervisors. In my program, we do an external portfolio review, and often that feedback comes from audiences that students see as more authentic and perhaps having more understanding of the target goals of their discipline. So they sometimes take that feedback more to heart than they do from faculty and staff that they're working with routinely. So one of the strategies that I like to use, it comes from Eli Review and Bill Hart-Davidson, and it's describe, evaluate, suggest. And this is something that can be used in any feedback context. I use it with my student employees. I use it with the interns that I mentor. I use it in my classes. But it's to describe what you see happening in the draft of the project, whether it's a class project or a project for a client or a project for a campus employment context. And then to evaluate it in relation to the goals for that project, and to suggest concrete ways to improve, ways to move towards the target goal for the project. So describe, evaluate, suggest. It's a great heuristic that we can adapt across our campuses to contribute to feedback literacy and feedback cultures. So I've got through three to go, and several of these are going to be a little bit briefer, in part because I think that from what I know about the Shepherd Consortium, you already are enacting a lot of connections to broader contexts. So when we frame connections to broader contexts, it helps students experiment with putting theory into practice as they navigate complex problems. And we often can move students beyond clearly structured problems with known solutions to the more variable problem solving or teamwork scenarios they'll encounter in the workplace and in their civic lives. 61% of recent graduates in our survey reported having multiple opportunities for this practice. 27% reported having one opportunity, and they wanted more. So we had a couple qualitative questions on this survey, and I could show you 40 different quotes that reiterate these ideas. The students or the recent alums really wanted to have had practice while they were under supervision, so that it was like a safety net for working in these authentic contexts. So they wanted to have more real life encounters, real life situations, both to help them reaffirm that what they thought they were interested really fit their values and interests, but also so that they could develop and practice some of the skills while they were still in a learning context. So there's a strong motivation for the internships that the Shepherd Consortium sponsors and many of the other community-based activities that you participate in. Of course, internships are a type of work integrated learning that can be an end point. If we think about ways that campuses or programs scaffold student learning towards that experience, we might start with case-based pedagogies, which are very bounded. There's usually one target outcome that students are working towards. Client projects start to get a little bit messier or a little bit more wicked. They tend to have parameters that clients set, but we all know that when we're working with real people, ideas change and evolve, and clients may not always say all of their needs up front. And so students have to work through that messiness a little bit more. If students have had both of those experiences, they tend to have more confidence when they enter a less structured context like an internship or a co-op. So one of the things that campuses and programs can do is think strategically about scaffolding or sequencing preparation towards more wicked tendencies. And we can also do smaller scale things. We can integrate current events, we can invite students to share relevant experiences, and we can partner with students to address campus and community wicked problems. Facilitating key practice number 5 is fostering reflection. And I call it a facilitating key practice because it really binds the other practices together. Reflection functions as a facilitator. It can prompt students to consider what prior knowledge and experiences might be relevant to a new situation. It can foster relationship development, help them attend to feedback, and make sense of how classroom learning connects to broader contexts. It also can encourage self-monitoring and mindfulness, which allows students to recall, reframe, and relocate their thinking, understanding, and processes. And that quote is from a chapter by one of our participants in our 2011-2013 research seminar on writing transfer. Unfortunately, only 55% of our participants reported having multiple opportunities to reflect on how parts of their college experience fit together, and 17% reported never having that opportunity. And we also looked at some crosstabs for specific groups. 22% of first-generation college students reported never having that opportunity, and 45% of our college graduates who reported not having opportunities for reflection also indicated that college was definitely not worth the time and cost. So that's a strong indicator that if we pick one key practice to focus on, we might want to start with reflection. Fortunately, there are an array of really strong tools to help with that. Iowa Grow has a great set of 4 questions that can be adapted for different contexts. And they've worked with several campuses around the US to create, for example, we have an Elon Grow here at Elon. But Iowa Grow participants were more likely to report that their student employment helped them gain work and career-related skills, form relationships, improve their time management skills, and enhance their communication skills, because the questions prompt students to think about what they're learning in the on-campus employment context, how it connects to their classes, and vice versa. An older tool, and this is from Pam Kaiser, an integrative processing model that she developed for originally, it's not internships originally, it'll come to me, but she later adapted it for internships and also for service learning. And then the describe, evaluate, and articulate learning model from Ashton Clayton builds on Pam Kaiser's model, and it's been prevalent both in service learning and in work integrated learning. At Elon, we developed what we call the FIRE toolkit, facilitating integration and reflection of Elon experiences. You can see on the top image there, we have 5 experiences. Our students are required to complete at least 2 of the 5. Many actually end up completing more. But one of the experiences is internships. We noticed that students needed more support thinking about how those internship experiences connected to their classroom experiences and vice versa, and to their longer term learning goals. And so we worked with our partners in each of the offices represented here to develop questions that could be conversation starters. And so these are things that faculty and staff can ask of the students that they advise or supervise or mentor, but they can also create space for students to ask questions of each other. And I actually had a group of first-year students who were using these to ask seniors about their own experiences with internships, undergraduate research, study abroad, and so forth. The entire set of the FIRE toolkit questions is available for free at the URL that you see there. But we also, I went ahead and included a snapshot of the internship questions on the slides here. In each case, we offer some pre-reflection questions to really help students anticipate what the experience might be and what they're carrying into that experience. We also then offer during and post-experience reflection questions to help them make meaning of that experience, both while they're in it and as they are thinking about how it connects back to their future goals and whatever is next for them. So again, you can find those on our website. There are also ones for study abroad, leadership, undergraduate research, and community-based learning. So the final key practice is promoting integration and transfer of knowledge and skills. And this one is really the end goal of higher education. So most of our universities are built on the assumption that students will transfer knowledge from course to course, from course to internships, from course to service learning sites, community-engaged learning sites, etc., and then into their future careers with the hope that they're integrating what they're learning along the way. 65.9% of our recent college graduates reported having multiple opportunities for that forward-thinking reflection, but 10.8% reported never having that opportunity. And it matters for a couple different reasons. And here we cycle back to why it's important to also help students make their prior knowledge and experience visible. So this is again from our work in 2011 to 2013, but some of our studies on transfer have identified that faculty often don't recognize students' attempts at transfer. So students will try something thinking that the knowledge that they learned in one course will work in this other course. The faculty don't understand that that's what the student has tried and just think the student doesn't understand what's happening in the current course. And unless we make that attempt more visible, the student is just left frustrated, wondering why something they learned in one course doesn't apply in this other context. And other studies have demonstrated that the different terminologies we use and different disciplinary understandings of the same term also can compromise transfer. So this was from our 2019 to 2021 research seminar, really just advocating for giving students opportunities to practice applying knowledge for new contexts. This seminar focused on writing, but I think that this is a practice that adapts to other types of skills and knowledge. The more we can give students scaffolded support to practice and get feedback, the more we're preparing them to do it on their own later. And here are a couple prompts that I often share for helping facilitate that. So asking students, what have you learned in your other classes that might help with this project? What have you learned in your internship or on-campus job? And then where in your daily life have you encountered similar ideas? Where do you think you could use this in the future? We can also model that transfer thinking for our students, and that's an important component as well. Not just helping them make it visible to us, but we can say, when I've encountered this type of project, I've drawn on this type of knowledge, or what we're talking about in this project or in this class session is really valuable when you're trying to do this type of activity. So helping them connect the dots between discrete learning items and the broader disciplinary and interdisciplinary context. So if we take you back to that meaningful learning moment that you were thinking about, I'm hoping that you may have recognized some key practices and action as you think about and reflect on that moment. I often hear people talk about their own connections to broader contexts, their own activation of prior knowledge, meaningful relationships, and so forth. And I will encourage you to share those when we get to our Q&A as well. Just a few final thoughts from me before we open it up. Just to reiterate, the key practices are my attempt to really think about how to engage and foster equitable, engaged learning. Moving past our challenges with scaling high quality, high impact practices to little things that we can do across our college campuses and with our community partners and supervised site partners and other contexts. So there are things that we can do in and beyond the classroom. You certainly don't have to do all 6 at once. Likely you're already doing some of them. And so I often encourage folks to do a little bit of mapping of where are you engaging in these practices in your work with students? And is there one that you might start to focus on expanding on? On the book's website, there are some tools for helping you think about that extension and the mapping activities. But with that, I will pause for questions. I know I just threw a lot at you, but again, the 6 key practices: acknowledging and building on students' prior knowledge and experiences, facilitating relationships, offering feedback, framing connections to broader contexts, fostering reflection on learning itself, and promoting integration and transfer of knowledge and skills. And with those 6, we can really work towards fostering more equitable, engaged learning. So thank you.
They can't clap, but I can. So, thank you. So we have a couple questions which I can dive into, but just want to encourage everyone else, if you want to post questions either in the chat or the Q&A, we'll be able to see that, and we can ask those. And I'm also able to we can unmute you if you prefer to ask the question. So one question for you is: are there specific trainings or preparations that we should consider to help prepare our students to give and get feedback? It can feel daunting to provide constructive feedback when it isn't something we're used to or something that we don't have the language for.
That's a great question. And I would point first and foremost to that describe, evaluate, suggest framework. That's something that Eli Review shares on their website. Eli Review is an educational tool for facilitating peer feedback, but they have a lot of great resources that are open access, even if you aren't using their product. And it's a product that was developed by researchers at Michigan State who are focused on feedback. but really modeling that heuristic for students, giving them practice with it. I find that if you spend a little bit of time in class, maybe showing an example, or in the campus context, campus job context, showing an example of what you might be working towards, and then work as a class through describing what you see, evaluating in relation to the goals for the project, and then making concrete suggestions of what could be done. Students pick it up pretty quickly, and then it is something that you can take outside of the classroom. It doesn't always have to be used in class time. If you spend just a little bit of time prompting students on how the heuristic works.
That's great. Sarah Farbo asks, I love thinking about how to create a culture of feedback. Can you share how you've worked on creating that at your institution, in particular across the entire campus, thinking about academic, career, co-curricular, and so on?
Absolutely. So this is something that I've taken that describe, evaluate, suggest framework and shared it with multiple groups. We have an employee resource group on our campus that's really focused on supervising student employees. And so, for example, we did a lunch session that was just focused on how do you use that framework in your campus employment context? How do you make space to work with students to describe what they've produced looks like, how it relates to your goals for the project, and then to suggest some concrete strategies for revision. We've also taken it into work with student groups, working with undergraduate researchers, working with some of our community-based learning groups who are then working with tutoring programs and the like, so that they can practice it in other contexts. It's not the only tool, but I think its simplicity is really helpful in that you can practice it quickly and then carry it across these different contexts. The other thing I'll say is that I also try to amplify when people are giving feedback and normalize it a bit. I think sometimes it's scary to get feedback because you're putting yourself out there and things that you've worked on. And so helping students see when we're processing feedback and our openness to that and how it's helping us refine the project that we're working on, I think is also really important for creating that feedback culture.
Have you seen schools successfully sort of reward, acknowledge, celebrate faculty and staff sort of doing some of these practices, or just curious if you've sort of encountered some of that?
I would say that it's celebrated much more on the faculty side. I think a lot of campuses have work to do in celebrating it on the staff side. Often promotion and tenure criteria speak to teaching effectiveness. And so you can talk about these types of practices as contributing to teaching and mentoring. For staff, they're doing these practices all the time and can certainly extend their work on them. But in my experience, too often the annual review reports don't really acknowledge that. So that's something that I've been working with leaders on my own campus is how do we make space in our evaluation mechanisms to really honor this work with students, which is the heart of the university. We wouldn't exist as colleges and universities without our students. So finding ways to forefront that in our evaluation is important. I will say that I think Iowa is a great example of where it is worked into the staff side a bit more, particularly with Iowa Grow. That's something that is celebrated on their campus and elsewhere. And so there's a little bit more traction for acknowledging and celebrating staff work with reflection.
Yeah. Do you have any sort of cautionary tales? So I can imagine, right, either folks watching, they're being part of this webinar or reading your book and they're, charging onto their campus and it's like, all right, we're going to do this. Where have you seen or would you expect to see sort of pushback on, right? Because there's like, great. It's like, sure, who would say no to this?
So I think that there are three cautions that I would offer. One, the pushback can often come in, you're asking us to do more. We already do so much. And I think that that's very true. So one of my second caution is don't overlook the things that your campuses are already doing. I think it's really important to do a program or campus inventory of where are the key practices already in action. You likely have some really strong examples on your own campuses that you can then amplify and share with other units, other departments. And so recognize that this isn't intended to be additive. It is at the heart of our campus work, but we're likely already doing some of it, and we need to pay attention to where we're doing it well and showcase that. And then the other thing I would offer as a caution is you don't have to do all 6 at once, and they are interconnected. So if you focus on 1 or 2, it will actually support later implementation of the others. And so in the book, I offer a couple of examples of thinking through where you might want to start. And that decision will vary from campus to campus and program to program, but you might start with 1, and once you've amplified it on your campus, then pick up another one.
That's fantastic. Well, that's our questions. I think everyone, thank you so much for taking the hour to join us and share this with us. I know folks who've watched it live and others who watch it later recording. This will hopefully sort of filter out and have a wonderful effect across our many campuses that are part of the consortium. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And if anyone has follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out. My email is on the screen, but always happy to visit more.
Yeah. And certainly do go to the Elon Center for Engaged Learning website and check out all the amazing opportunities and resources that are there and available for all. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day.